Good day to you. This is Anagalactic. In a series that we're calling Quantum Geometry, over here you'll see a very simply drawn sphere that has four labels on it. You could probably guess by their position, even if you can't read the letters. There is a little arrow that points at the center, because every sphere has a center. We'll be talking about that today. There is a diameter, which, as you know, is twice the radius. And then there is, for our convenience in visualization, an ellipse that is drawn inside the circle, showing that that is the great circle of a sphere. So this is a projection down to 2D of what would be called typically a 3D projection. A 3D to 2D projection would be the full term. So this is a flat screen image, and that's why you can see it. We see flat screen images very well. So it is meant to show a higher space though. So we call that 3D because that's the linear extension of 2D, which is the squared plane. So all of that makes sense. We've been over that in great detail. Let's proceed forward with the geometry of the sphere, which I am able to show now is the discovery of the world's first intrinsic geometry. This is a technical term which you will come to have defined in your mind by seeing it. So that I don't have to tell you the definition, I'll show it to you. You're essentially looking at it. You'll see that the inside of the circle is grayed, but if you use slightly averted vision, if you don't already see, it has a lighter spot basically to the northwest quadrant of this circle. You'll see that it's lighter shaded, and that is to give the illusion of sphericity. There is another illusion, actually two. The great circle is not a circle as it's drawn, but you can picture it as being the equator of that sphere. So that's the great circle. I call it the equator because that is, if there's only one great circle, it would usually be called the equator. But the equator has a specific definition on a sphere, which we're also getting to. But in general, the generic term for that kind of a circle on a sphere, the largest circle that can be drawn, is a great circle. And it is called a great circle to indicate that it can have any orientation with reference to the surface of the sphere by dialing it, essentially rotating the circle to any orientation. So that, in general, is called a great circle. But there's one specific great circle which is not exactly synonymous with equator. The equator is one specific great circle, but what makes it specific? What distinguishes the equator from any great circle? Why would there be one specific one? I'm sure you can guess if you don't already know. It's because of the rotational component of the sphere, which is a very interesting motion at all scales, because it's nonlinear motion. And we'll be talking about that because motion is the key to spacetime. And motion is very necessary in the definition of light speed. So motion can be said to constitute a quantity, and that is how it's treated in terms of velocity, which is directed speed, which is distance over time. And there's your motion. Distance is not motion, the way we conceive the definition of distance. That is a static, fixed distance. Although Einstein did kind of upset that standard image, it is still a valid point of view if you know what you're doing by saying that a straight line is the shortest distance between 2 points. It can be proved that that can be made to be consistent. But it's quite an interesting prospect to use a straight line in a spherical space. So what you're seeing here is intended to connote a sphere, and that's obvious from the optical illusions. I've pointed out two of them. One is the shading, and there's a technical name for that which you may know if you're into photography or video engineering, that shading is very important to create the illusion of depth. And that's what's being done here in a very simple form by shading the gray interior of the circle. And that is meant to connote that the surface of this is not just circular, which It is, technically, but it's meant to show that this is a projection of a spherical space. So the circle that's drawn as an ellipse is drawn that way to connote a circle that's been rotated like a plate that's facing you. It's tilted like there is a string through it, and it's rotated up and down, so it tends to disappear toward a straight line, in this case horizontal. If that ellipse continued to be rotated so that the far and the near became parallel in our line of sight, then it would be a straight line. And you can see that that's drawn as a green line, but it's tilted at an axis. It's not vertical or horizontal, it's on an angle, and that's to show that it's actually a straight line through the center that intersects the great circle, which actually defines what the great circle would be. They're in dual. So the diameter defines a great circle. At the same time, a great circle defines a diameter, but the diameter can be oriented anywhere on the circle. Now, the radius is simply, of course, half of the diameter. And this has caused an interesting bifurcation in how we set up what is called the parameterization of the circle, because you can do so using the diameter as your baseline, or you can use the radius. And I'm fairly certain you're aware of which one is preferred in modern mathematics. It's always the radius. The diameter, of course, is equivalent to the radius on a constant of 2, where you have to be specific which one is 2 with proportion to the other. So that's called a 2-to-1 proportion. And it can be written as a fraction, but it's non-commutative. So you have to be sure that you write it either 2 over 1, which is the ratio of the diameter to the radius, where the 2 is the numerator and the denominator is 1. And we say that that reduces to 2. Of course, that's a reduction in the data type. So the relation of 2 to 1 is a specific number in a specific space, in this case the circle, because we're talking about the great circle and the diameter is from one antipode to another of that great circle. They're at opposite ends of the sphere or the circle, because the circle is it's subimposed, you could say, but it's really in the diagram superimposed. They're superimposed on each other, and that also is non-commutative. So we're introducing a lot of technical terms. I must go fast because I've been warned by my viewership that now's the time to start speeding things up. And so there's a trade-off when you do that, and this may be a little bit daunting, but don't forget you can always rewind this. And I have been practicing for 3.5 years to give this sequence, and I've done so a few dozen times, but each time it gets better. So I'm capitalizing on the additional research that I've been able to get more discoveries out of this geometry, and I'm introducing you to that geometry that unlocks physics and ultimately redefines mathematics itself, which is quite necessary now, but that sounds rather preposterous. So you're in for a ride, and I hope you enjoy it. Our goal in this first sequence, which should, I imagine, at this moment, should take about an hour based on a projection, which I'm usually short. It may be longer than an hour, but what you'll come out with after having listened to this full video is we are going to conjugate infinity, which may sound strange to you, and you're not sure how to react to that. Be assured that I am a professional presenter, and I know how to make science easy. That's my job, is to make this easy for anybody, actually for a child. And Einstein has a famous quip about this, so I'm in good company in saying that this should be simple. It will be, but don't forget what we're doing. We're actually penetrating past the envelope. We're pushing the envelope to where it breaks, and we finally get the solutions. And that's frightening. That's going to be frightening to a very, very large demographic of scientists who will feel threatened by solutions, because the solutions won't be the ones that they're seeking. It's what the universe says is the solutions to the questions we're asking. The universe has the answers. The scientists don't. And the scientists will take that quite to heart, because really their identities, and this is just a general statistical observation which is confirmed, but it's a little loopy, because it has to do with an irrational reaction, an emotional reaction, a vested interest in who you are, And if someone tells the truth about the universe, but it's not what your Vatican has said that supports your life, it's your money pipeline, is the lies you've been telling, is all based on lies, such as the expansion of the universe or natural selection of humans. All of these things are just crazy. And we're sick and tired of dark matter and dark energy and quantum flux and quarks and pions and muons and mesons and supermassive black holes and bouncing universes and parallel universes and multiverses and many worlds nonsense and crazy notions of backwards time and inside out space and an origin to the universe that is absolutely anti scientific, a definition of who humans are that is anti human, and all kinds of crazy lies, basically fostered by group minds that perpetuate beyond the lifespan of one generation of men. And these entities take on a life of their own. They're called beasts in the major religions, all of which I subscribe to and attempt to lead in my own small way as a guide. Islam and Christianity, the two religions that have the transmission information about the flood. And because that is about the flood, and you remember Noah, if you know anything about revealed religion, you know that this is the religion you want to pay attention to because it's a transmission from the origin of humans about that time, actually exactly at that time, which has been kept by some means throughout the history of mankind. So there is a record of the prophecy of the flood at the time when nobody knew there was going to be a flood. And after that flood, which was ecocidal, there were men who somehow survived that flood by, you would have to say, a miraculous means, and they are the fathers, actually those four men with their wives, 8 souls, aboard the ark, which repopulated the earth with humans without any speciation, but with a phenotypic diversification that's produced 4 major groups of humans, and which define all humans. So it's quite a story of how we got the 4 races, which is a loaded term. I wish there were a synonym for it. You could say ethnic groups, but that's almost worse. What it is a phenotypical diversification into 4 main chunks, one of which is white, one of which is black, and 2 of which are essentially brown. And that defines every culture and every society that's ever existed on Earth, to the best of our records, which go back to the flood, and that has been proved. And it was proved in my lifetime there was a flood. So that's major news, which you're actually not allowed to know technically, but you certainly could find out. It's in Wikipedia. So that is known. It was discovered during my span of life on Earth. Actually, technically, in the 1980s, this discovery began to be made that the flood did happen, but currently in Wikipedia, it's dated to 66 million years ago. They're quite precise about this. And there's quite a, I guess you could say, an artificial or angels on a pinhead argument between these liars because it's not millions of years, but they had reason to think so. But they argued about whether it was 65 or 66 million years ago. So they're psychotic. That is actually crazy. That's a very serious internal inconsistency in their approach to their own model. That they would be willing to argue between 65 and 66 million years ago for what is now a dated event. And it's the most surely dated event in the geology of the Earth, which is a chronological scale, as you know, of time going backwards. When was the flood? Well, further research, really beginning in the 21st century, as far as my research has been able to determine, although this does go back to the 1960s and before, flood geology has been known of. But it was never able to prove anything against the standard model of geological timescale, which is millions of years, actually tens of millions, because the major event we want to date is the flood, which did occur. That's been proved. But how long ago was it? Well, using radiometric dating, which is quite a hoax, quite an interesting story, as radiometric dating is considered to be the voice of God himself, and it's treated that way, and it's the only source of this model is radiometric dating, which, as you know, the original form discovered was, I'm fairly certain it was the carbon-14-12 decomposition schedule. It's actually a half-life, and so you can develop a chronological scale depending on the difference between one, I guess you would say, community of molecules, some of which are C14 and some of which are C12, but the C14 molecules break down into C12 at a known rate called the half-life of that isotope. So that is the source of the original radiometric dating. There's now a list of radiometric datings, and one of the most popular ones, which I've explored as far as I can or dare, is argon-argon. It's called argon-argon, which I believe, if I recall from my research, refers to the two isotopes. So it is a common technique that is not limited to the carbon-14-12 cycle, or decomposition as I call it. It's really a result of beta decay fission. If I've got that right, it's quite an interesting topic, of course, and quite deep, is how one isotope of an element just spontaneously decomposes into another isotope, which is essentially a lower energy level if I'm counting right. C14 would have more energy in it than C12, simply because that number there does refer to the number total of neutrons and protons, if I've got that right. The atomic number refers to the number of protons, and we covered that in the prior video. This sphere you're looking at essentially could be thought of as a proton. So that sphere is the counting number of the system, and you're looking at the number 1 in the counting number system of the universe. So this is quite a physically profound thing that you're looking at. Thing, as you know, is a province of physics. And this is a thing. We actually know that it's a proton. Now you can conceive of this sphere as describing the geometry of several systems, including the solar system, where, as you know, it literally would be a little ellipsoidal. In the case of the heliosphere, which does make a sphere in space, it's slightly ellipsoidal because the sun actually rotates with respect to the surrounding space. And that was quite difficult to prove, but the sun does have a rotational axis and a rotation rate, which means that the solar wind that flies out like a ballerina's skirt, and it's a giant spiral, and it's beautiful. But it ends at the surface of a sphere, which is not quite a sphere, it's an ellipsoid because of the rotation rate of the entire body of matter that's being exuded by the sun at a tremendous blast rate, which goes by the Earth at quite a high velocity. It's a plasma. And if we didn't have the magnetosphere, we would be wiped out and we'd end up looking like Mars, which is quite a statement because the most recent research having been conducted on the surface of Mars, both from above the Mars in orbit to take photographs and various readings of the surface and subsurface, but also on the surface itself. We have rovers, as you know, and also drones. So it's quite a project, and it's going on at quite a rapid race, the exploration of Mars' surface, as if we were looking for something. Well, one of the things we were looking for was evidence of life on Mars, which is always top priority, of course. It's a little remote, it's improbabilistic, but we still hope. We want to check, we want to be sure. There's apparently reason to believe, statistically, you could adopt the belief that that might be likely, that you might expect to find evidence of life on Mars, but for a long time, really up until the present day, it's been rather hopeful. But recently, direct evidence has been discovered of water on Mars. And the existence of water on Mars has been known for a while, but that in itself is rather improbabilistic, depending on your model of how planets form. So it does go deep, and there's a lot of speculation, necessary speculation. This is not wild speculation, but it is a little. You do have to prove everything you say, and to prove the existence of water on Mars, you really have to go there, and so we have. And who's we? Well, it's the United States government, whatever that is. But whatever it is, we, the niggers, get the crumbs that fall from Satan's table. So whatever the government is up to, which is definitely no good, and if you're into conspiracy theories, I suggest you start thinking along the lines of why is the most powerful government that the world has ever seen exploring the surface of Mars, and why would they care at all about whatever's on Mars? Why would anybody do that? Well, there's a good myth that covers that, which I bought into because I didn't have much choice as a youth. But as an older man, I am able to see through some of the brainwashing that I was subjected to. It's really necessary to scrutinize that operation in some way. Why the hell Would a giant government with trillions of dollars spend its money to get to the moon and then to Mars, the nearest planet? The nearest planet going outward. There are two inner planets, Venus and Mercury, which are quite peculiar and hard to explain why they are the way they are. They're quite different planets. And Earth is most unique, we would all agree, due to its extraordinary ecology, which is the most complex system ever seen by the eyes of man, which it's safe to say now is very difficult to explain completely. It's extraordinarily complex. There are millions of species which are locked to genetic codes which have no known origin. They just appeared on Earth in the millions, and they never change. But then a theory was devised because Darwin was fairly able to prove that they must have changed somehow, because look at these finches' beaks and other genotypical characters. This is not like the diversification of humans into different phenotypes, which is part of the locked code. But a change in genotype is transmitted as a actual change to the code. And this is really interesting because everything that I'm saying could be said either of the phenotype or the genotype, but the genotype is quite distinct, even though it contains the entire phenotype. But the phenotype is probabilistic, and that's been known for a couple of centuries. But Darwin didn't know anything more than that about DNA. It was not known that it was a code. And it really is remarkable, the story in the 19th century, essentially in England, is where this occurred, with Darwin and Russell and a few others who were looking into this, and they immediately became convinced by the geologists that you can use time frames of millions of years. That had just been discovered in geology. That is theorized. That the rock layers, basically the strata of rock on the Earth, particularly because of the fossils, there were bones in these strata that were discovered in Europe extensively in the 19th century. This is the first discovery of fossils. Although that does go back a little ways, it was never exploited. Finally it became a rage, and it spread to America. The search for dinosaur bones became a tremendous scandal, a huge blight on the already soiled white race and how they exploit things when they discover something good. The search for dinosaur bones in the United States was a rapacious, cutthroat industry of murderers and thieves who would do anything and lie in any way to get those dinosaur bones for themselves and get credit for their discoveries and sell them. They could sell those bones. And so it was like discovery of gold. And there was prospecting done for dinosaur bones. And quite a few crimes were committed because it was, of course, the white fucking European goddamned race looking for dinosaur bones for reasons that had nothing to do with science, but everything to do with money. Everything to do with money and fame, which translates to money. It's the money they want. They want the money. They don't want the dinosaur bones to enlighten mankind to their origins. But there was scientific research going on, and that was one of the reasons the dinosaur bones were being bought. Because what the hell bones, what are these bones of? And they were being reconstructed, and oh my God, the age of dinosaurs was discovered. That there were dinosaur bones of animals that no longer exist, and this was a shock. How long ago did these animals exist? Well, very quickly, the geologists offered an opportunity to explain that, because Lyell and Hutton and many others, around the turn to the 1800s, from the 1700s to the 1800s, geology had become quite a scientific exploit in inviting quite a bit of research into stratolayers, which were just then being discovered. These were being discovered in geology, these stratolayers of rock, wherein were found bones. And it was quite a job to explain how these bones got locked into stratolayers of rock. That's very difficult to explain. Ordinarily, when a creature dies on the surface of the earth of any size, it decomposes, even the bones are gone within a very short, we're talking about just hundreds of years, No trace of that animal is left. Under normal death and decomposition, the way it goes on Earth, everything is recycled. There are no bones, but they can exist because they were discovered. Well, how the hell did those bones get preserved in rock? Extraordinarily difficult question to answer. Well, scientists are expected to at least come up with a theory. It's really what we do when we don't have the answer. We have to guess. Because you see, we're the only ones who might know. Because we have the evidence to prove something. So you got to say what it proves. Well, that's where the millions of years came from, but nobody could actually confirm that. It just made more sense than thousands of years. And that does make sense, to the same proportion that Darwin's suggestion that it sure looks like animals speciated, because look at this, and you're looking at a chart of speciation itself, it looks like you have direct evidence of it. It needs to be analyzed, of course, but that is the first. I would say that I agreed with Darwin. I agree with Darwin to this day, but it's hard to prove one way or the other, and Darwin admitted that. But you see, when you're provoked as scientists, as a community, to have some standard answer, because that's what people want to tell the kids in class. What did we discover about fossils? Well, they're millions of years old, is the short story. But now evidence has been unearthed, literally, all the way up until the present day. This excavation, archaeology it's called, and paleontology has gone on. This has a lot to do with what we're talking about, but I do mix two topics because they overlap. But in any event, we'll drop that topic for now. I always like to introduce the flood geology vector in science because it's something you should study. You really must. And you must come over to the right side because that's what scientists are expected to do. If it means you have to become a hero in some way because you're bucking the system, well, Daddy-o, I hope you're in for the ride because that's why we're here. Scientists have always done that. That's what we do. We do buck the system if there's sufficient evidence to overthrow a false model. That entails a war. And if it involves money, there will be bloodshed. There already has been. There always will be. But you still have to do it if you're a righteous man because we defend the truth. So people will have choices. That's the whole reason for scientists, is to give the youth, the next generation, a chance that we didn't have. We discovered something that will help the next generation. It's too late for us. Maybe we did exploit what we found out, but you want to pass that information on. That alone is science. It's consensual and it's progressive and it's cumulative and it's supposed to better humanity. Is it? Not when you lie. It's hard to see why that would be troublesome because doesn't it make sense? Not anymore, it doesn't. That millions of years doesn't exist. So you need to know that. Well, you need to know both sides of the argument so you can make up your own mind. You are being systematically lied to. Everyone knows that. It's just a question of what is the right answer. Well, I claim to have that knowledge directly and provably in science. It totally justifies Islam and Christianity and fully justifies the transmission religion, which is a very good thing to have a choice about. So you do have a choice. Religion is not irrational. It's totally consistent with physics. If you believe the Bible, you're correct. Science can back you up. You believe in God, absolutely. Every scientist believes in God. Or he's not a scientist. It's as simple as that. He's a liar. That can be proved, so that's rock bottom. You can't be a scientist unless you agree with what I just said. So you do have to fight brainwashing. It's your job. You have to. You don't have a choice if you're a scientist. Otherwise, you're a hypocrite, and that's an extremely evil thing to be. Don't ever say one thing and do another. You're sworn to tell the truth. You're always allowed to say you don't know. Of course, that hurts. That hurts any scientist. That's a bad answer. You don't actually want to say that you don't know. But in certain specifics, if it means deciding between one model and another, and there's a controversy over the primary evidence for one model or the other, then you have to commit. And you might be wrong. So you have to be very cautious. And if you're not certain, if you yourself are not certain, that's when you say you don't know. If you're not certain, you say you don't know. But if you have evidence, you present the evidence. That's telling the whole truth. Say it's 99% sure that the Grand Canyon is not millions of years old. If you say it's 99% certain, that's reasonable. You're going out on a limb, you could be challenged. Well, you better be ready for that. Can you back up your statement? That's science. You have to prove what you say, but you also have to say something. You can't just claim agnosticism in science, because that's not science, it's denial. We don't deny anything, we address all questions, but you have to tell the truth. That's the big difference. You can't say something that can't be proved. So it leaves out, it seems, most religion. Well, not in the case of the transmission record of the flood, it doesn't. That has been confirmed that the Bible is true. Does that mean the whole Bible is true? No. No, it doesn't. But it does condone the transmission, because how the hell did you know there was a flood? You would want to listen to that source. Well, that's called comparative religion in one aspect of approach. So the nature of the flood is very important in religion because it has to do with the origins of humans. And there's a story about that that goes back before the flood, and that is a mouthful that you can't overlook. What do you mean there's evidence from before the flood? Humans existed before the flood. Well, now you want to know when the flood was. There's evidence over the past 40 years that shows when the flood was, and it wasn't millions of years ago. You absolutely have to know that that line of argumentation is valid. Whether you end up agreeing with it or not is entirely up to you as a scientist. That's why you're part of science, is to evaluate that and give your evaluation. But you want to be honest. Don't say something that you don't know. If you're evaluating a question that has a hot fucking debate going on, you're going to have to check the evidence on both sides. You have no choice if you're a scientist. You have to do the work. You have to read the papers. You have to get both sides. And if you don't have all the evidence from both sides, you're ill-equipped to make that evaluation. So you do have to do the footwork. Well, I've done it all my life. So I've been after this a long time. So in my lifetime, we not only discovered the flood, but we also discovered the time frame for when it occurred. And it was within the last 10,000 years. That has actually been proved. Now, you may not be able to accredit that. Be honest with yourself. Don't agree with me just because I claim to be a guru. Do you know where you're from? Well, if you don't know that, I really, really feel sorry for you, because you're going to be not knowing anything about why you're doing anything. You have to solve your personal equation. And you can do it on science's time, because science will support true religion. It does. It supports the Bible. Genesis record is true. There's a lot more to it than that. It's not just that the flood was predicted, which is miraculous. There's no way to explain that except by accrediting the record. If that can be done, it has been done. I did it. And I'm not the only one who's validated the correct transmission. It has to do with the prediction of the flood. That's been confirmed. Somebody told Noah about the flood. That is true. But what's the message? I mean, the flood has come and gone, and now what? Well, there was another prophecy that goes with the prophecy of the flood, from before the flood. And that's the prophecy of Yeshua, the elect one. We know his name now. He was born on earth. The elect one who was prophesied by Enoch, the first prophet. All right, Islam has interesting things to say about that, and they accredit everything that I just said, and they are correct, because I'm correct, because I know what I'm talking about, because I've checked all the evidence, and there's no question. The flood was about 8,000 years ago, and the secondary floods were within the past 8 to 6,000 years ago. And a lot of tribes around the earth remember the secondary floods. All of this explains the Grand Canyon, which is a major discovery, and the total explanation of the geology of the Colorado Plateau, a huge section of the surface of the earth. Also explains the Himalayan uplift. And everyone always likes to bring in right now, oh, and plate tectonics. Yeah, that's been disproved too. Although the plate tectonics is true, the source of the plate tectonic movement is false in the current model. That's been disproved. There's much more rapid activity. It didn't take millions of years for the plates to drift around. It took years, just years, really decades. After the flood, the plates of the earth were in very high velocity all over the earth, and they didn't settle for centuries. And that's in human records, particularly the Greeks remember this. So there was a civilization in Greece sufficiently early after the flood to remember secondary flooding, particularly of the Black Sea. And the Black Sea tribes remember that. They have stories about that local flooding, that secondary flooding from the Chicxulub flood, all of which is in Wikipedia, so you can check all this. But the dating is wrong because of the lie of radiometric dating, scalar dating. It wasn't millions of years ago. And the comet did not strike 66 million years ago. It struck 8,000 years ago. And that's not enough for speciation without angelic intervention. I discovered that in the Book of Enoch. There was angelic the angelic engineers came back, the same ones that initiated the creation of the solar system, which is the creation of the heavens and the earth. The heavens are the solar system, and the earth is part of the solar system. That was the creation of the heavens and the earth, documented. Who told Adam that? That was a supernatural transmission that Enoch wrote down because he knew Adam. And he also knew Noah. He talked with Noah directly. There is evidence that Enoch also talked with Adam directly. Their lives did overlap. So Enoch wrote down what Adam knew from however he got his information, which is not recorded, but it may have been lost. Enoch wrote a lot, and a lot of it was suppressed over the millennia. But we do have supernaturally controlled transmission, which was preserved against all odds, an amazing story, miraculous story, the preservation of the Book of Enoch, which says essentially that the Elohim initiated speciation in the animals. But they did not initiate speciation in the humans because humans cannot be speciated. They don't speciate in either direction. We're not descended from anything, and we'd have no descendants. That's unique among all animals. So we're not animals. We're humans. We were created separately, and that was also explained to Adam. The heavens and the earth were created first, but within a very short time, man was placed on the earth, and then a woman. They conjugated and had children, and that's how it began. Then there was a flood predicted by Enoch, and Noah took that book, which Enoch wrote, and that has been proved. Noah had that on the ark. Perhaps not in book form, but there's no reason to doubt that he did have that in book form. But if he didn't, he had perfect memory, and that can be proved. So Noah then wrote it down, or somebody did, after the flood. And Noah was taught how to write by Enoch. We cannot prove that. But there's a very, very difficult period after the flood where a piece of the record is missing. Between the time of Noah landing on Ararat and the animals beginning to speciate under alien control, as aliens came back and speciated the animals because only aliens can do that. So they forced the animals to speciate and to spread out very, very, very rapidly. This is supernatural. And it's still physically correct. God never violates physics. That cannot happen. He won't. Could he? I leave that for your theological, philosophical discussions over brandy or however you end up talking about that, which you'll never understand. But it's worth talking about. Perhaps you'll figure out something. Nobody has yet, but yes, it was aliens, because that's the only logical thing that could have happened. That's confirmed both by science, indirectly, and by direct transmission testimony, absolutely. There would be an elect one, and actually there was, Yeshua. So the prophecy transmission line is secure. Muhammad actually validated it, and that was the real reason for Muhammad's mission, which now affects over 2 billion people. That's the major religion of Earth. That is Christianity. And that's the only locus of Christianity left, is Islam. They fully believe in Yeshua and the gospel. And you can take it from me, and don't try to argue with me. I'll crush you. So just accept the truth because it's good. You shouldn't argue against something that's good. Don't argue with me. Whatever I say is going to be good, or I wouldn't do this. So stay tuned. We will go into the parts of the sphere, but really what we're going to get is the conjugation of two infinities, which, since I didn't really tell you anything, let me just jump ahead to let you know what you're going to learn. Is that center to that sphere? What is that? How do we know that that center is there? Well, it's because the sphere is there. All right. How do we know the sphere is there? Because we can measure its position. Is there anything in the universe that conforms to this geometry? Yes. And only one object, only one thing in the universe is a countable one of these spheres, and that is called a proton. The proton generates a sphere in space, and the center is what the Hadron Colliders are trying to discover, is what's generating that sphere. And if they find that out, they believe that they will have found out a secret to the next level of weaponry, because that will unleash the strong force. That's what they're trying to figure out. It's much, much stronger than any other force in the universe, and if they can unlatch it, they'll have a doomsday device. Although actually, technically, the arsenals of at least Russia and the United States still contain a doomsday device. And it was exploded once at dumbed down strength over Nova Zemlya in 1961, I believe. When I was 7 years old, this most massive bomb was exploded over Nova Zemlya. Well, the strong force is orders more powerful than that. So if they're successful, they could incinerate the Earth with one test. But they're actually quite wary of that because they already know what they're dealing with, because they saw what happened when the Tsar Bomba went off. By far the most massive explosion that humankind has ever set off. And then the Cold War was called off, officially, by Mr. Big, or the one with the Persian cat, whoever it is that calls the shots. Probably from Jerusalem, you would imagine so. All of that is documented, but it's a little far afield of our endeavor to understand the secrets of the universe. So that center is related to the sphere to the proportion that the sphere, which is a surface, as you can see, that surface is related to the center. What is the relation? The relation is centripetal force to centrifugal force. The two forces that balance the Noether symmetry for conserved force in the universe that Newton overlooked, and so did Einstein. Mach really made the most progress because he's one of the foremost scientists that ever explored the amazing phenomenon of centrifugal force. Centrifugal force is the force that's going out from the surface of the sphere. That centrifugal force that goes out from this thing, this object, this sphere, that's a proton. Well, what makes the spheric surface? I know, but physics doesn't know. It's the conjugation of two infinities. And that introduces imaginary space because we cannot picture imaginarity. Well, I can now, and I'll show you how you must, or you'll never understand space-time, which is actually a misnomer. I'll show you that it's actually space energy, the greatest discovery in the Einsteinian lineage of science that unlocks everything. So I hope you're ready for the conjugation of infinity that explains light speed and the collapse of the wave function and quantum gravity. You're looking at quantum gravity. That will be in the next video. You're looking at the only counter in the universe. That is the number 1 proportion 1. And one of the quantities in relation in this fraction is, of course, space. What's the other one? Is it time? I'll show you that that's actually a derivative of the conjugate term. So space is conjugate with time, which is actually frequency, and frequency is reciprocal to wavelength, and that defines light speed, and it also defines energy, and it also defines light, and it also defines electromagnetic conjugation, which Maxwell discovered is a perpendicularity in spherical space. And I confirmed that mathematically using a new mathematics. So stay tuned for that. You'll definitely want to know that, because that is the answer to quantum mechanics and cosmology at all scales. And it goes directly to the definition of consciousness reality, which is one thing, and they're conjugated in what you call your consciousness. That is part of the universe, but it's a conjugation between you and it. And that is the continuity of consciousness, which must be discretized, that is quantized, for it to be real. And that produces the quantum paradox in consciousness. So you have to solve for consciousness and reality. I have. So you'll get that too. And that's a major insight into all sciences. All right. Stay tuned. Keep looking up. We have a new moon in about, well, less than just a few days will be the new moon. We'll cover that, the most blessed time of the month. in a 29 and a half day cycle or a 28 and a quarter day cycle, depending on if you're using sidereal positioning or the other one. So we'll cover that so you'll get the blessings of the Sabbath, the most beautiful gift of our beneficent Father. May his name be praised forever. Amen. Thank you.
And I mean that kindly. We're all idiots in the eyes of the universe.